So, Jacobean period. Before I start talking about Jacobean period, before I start talking about the writers, the poets who were prominent, the essayists also who were prominent at this period, I'd like to discuss about few important things that are necessary to understand a period. That are necessary to understand any period for that matter. The not only the socio-cultural background but also the cultural paradigm. What was the cultural paradigm of a period? Cultural nuances that were happening at that period. What were the forces that forced a writer, that influenced a writer to write, to produce that kind of literature? So Jacobean period, when we talk about Jacobean period, it was started with James the First, we all know. And that what was the timeline? The timeline was 1603 to 1625. Now remember, what was exactly before this? Exactly before this period, there was Elizabethan period, right? Now that we try to understand Elizabethan period, it's very significant, it's very important to understand the cultural paradigm of that period, because one of our most important problems of dealing with history of English literature is that we try to understand the period more, we try to understand literature of a period more in a manner of Old English period, Middle English period, Romantic period, and all. What we often neglect is the socio-cultural paradigm of a particular period. So, by continuously saying cultural paradigm, what I am trying to say, I am trying to mean how religion was the predominant force in the Old English poetry, how religion was the predominant force in the Middle English period, and how from the very beginning of Elizabethan period, from the very beginning of Renaissance, the idea is being changed. When we talk about Elizabethan period, the most important thing or the first thing that pops up in your mind is definitely the idea of Renaissance, right? Elizabethan period, Renaissance humanism. And what is Renaissance? You must be telling me that Renaissance is the revival of classical learning. It's very normal, because this is the definition, this is the thing that we have been learning from our school days maybe. We have been memorizing this kind of definition that Renaissance was the revival of classical learning. So what we didn't ask at that period, at the time, what we didn't know at that time, what we didn't question, is maybe the question that how this revival changed our perspective, how this revival, not only our perspective, changed that era, changed what it did to us, what this revival of classical learning did to us, how it affected the entire cultural paradigm of that period. This is the question we seldom ask, mostly ignored question. So when we talk about Renaissance, what comes to your mind first? Renaissance humanism. And what is Renaissance humanism? We are trying to understand important things. We are trying to understand all of the literature of that period in the perspective of human being. Man is the excellence of, man is the center of all kind of excellence. Like, you talk about any Old English poetry, starting from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight to Pearl, you will not see as man to be as prominent as it was in the Elizabethan period. At that time, religion was the most important thing, because at the end of the day, one thing that was very prominent, that was very clear, one idea that was very clear at that time is that who has created you? Who has created you? God. Who can destroy you? God. So your understanding of life is entirely engulfed by the idea of God and religion. This is what was propagated by the church itself. But with the beginning of Elizabethan period, with the beginning of Renaissance, this understanding is being changed, and man is coming to the front of any discussion of uh, or any literary work. You talk about the writings of Christopher Marlowe, talk about the writings of Shakespeare, talk about Petrarchan sonnets, talk about the poetry of Sidney Spencer, you'll see that man is the most important thing. Nowhere in these writings you'll find to religion to be the predominant force. Why I'm saying all these things? Why I'm supposed to teach? I'm supposed to discuss, not teach. Supposed to discuss Jacobean period. Why I'm talking about so much about Elizabethan period? Because one thing we have to understand that Che Dharana, the idea that was started from Elizabethan period with Renaissance humanism, that continued for a long. এটা কিন্তু এমন নয় যে একটা সময়ে শুরু হলো এবং সেটা এলিজাবেথান পিরিয়ডে থেমে গেল, জ্যাকোবিয়ান পিরিয়ডে এর কোনো এফেক্ট ছিল না, এটা কিন্তু সম্পূর্ণ ভুল। ইট ওয়াজ কন্টিনিউইং। সো দিস ওয়াজ অল অ্যাবাউট দ্য কালচার অ্যান্ড আর্ট। Another important thing is, second important thing is the colonial exploration, the scientific discoveries that were happening in this period, in this Renaissance period. Like you talk about different colonial explorations of Galileo, of Copernicus. What were they actually doing? They were actually going to the unknown places. They were not bothered about what kind of danger was waiting for them. They just went. They just went to discover new things, to learn new ideas, to explore different things. Most of you, of course, definitely have heard about or learned that poem. থাকবো না কো বদ্ধ ঘরে, দেখবো এবার জগৎটাকে কেমন করে ঘুরছে মানুষ যুগান্তরের ঘূর্ণিপাকে। So what is the spirit of this poem? The spirit of this poem is essentially of Renaissance. I'll go here and there. I want to see the world. I want to explore the entire world. I'll not be limited anymore. The world is something that is within my jurisdiction. আমি আর কোনো ভয় পাবো না। So what these people like Copernicus and Galileo trying to do? They were just trying to prove something scientifically, which was against the dogmatic idea of religion, the dogmatic idea of church. You talk about innumerable scientists who were coming at this time. From 1620 onwards, we see the great thing called enlightenment, the age of sensibility, I mean the sense of rationality, to understand something with logic, to use logic in order to get new ideas. The time of reasoning, this is, I'm talking about 1620, which is of course in the Jacobean period. And from 1650 onwards, you will see the metaphysical poets are becoming prominent. John Donne, our Marvel, they're all coming, Herbert. So যুক্তির মাধ্যমে কোনো জিনিসকে বোঝা, this is the essence of Renaissance that was started with the Elizabethan period and that continued for a long time, and of course in the Jacobean period. And from the point of view of literature, when I talk about this particular time, this particular timeline, one thing that has to be mentioned, one person that has to be mentioned is of course our similar idea in the essays of Bacon also. I'll definitely talk about Bacon in the later part of the video, talk about essays in the later part of the video, but in a nutshell, let us now understand Bacon in this context. Like, Bacon is called to be the last person of Renaissance and the first person of enlightenment. He is acting as a bridge. মানে বিজ্ঞান সম্বন্ধে এরকম কথা বলা হতো যে বিজ্ঞান এনগালফড নলেজ, বিজ্ঞান নট, বিজ্ঞান একদম নলেজ গুলে খেয়েছে। মানে a person who is writing of studies is the same person who is writing of travel, is the same person who is writing of friendship. Means there is no such area about which he didn't write, he didn't master. There is no such area. He is writing Novum Organum. He is the same person who is writing the advancement of learning, which is coming in 1620. So what's the prominent idea in this essence is you read, you think, you ask questions, you penetrate, and you use your logic. You understand by thinking. What is this? This is the spirit of Renaissance, of course. Let us now talk about the political background of this Jacobean period. You know who was the king who was ruling in this timeline, in this period, is King James I, and from 1603 to 1625, roughly this timeline. So when we utter the phrase Jacobean period, one question that must have popped up your mind is, why is this period called Jacobean period? Because we know that from the name of Queen Elizabeth, the period was called Elizabethan period. Then why not from the name of King James, the period is called Jamesian period, or not anything like this? Because the period is not called Jamesian period. It is primarily because if you search this word James in Latin, it is called Jacobus or Jacob. From this word Jacobus, the word Jacobean period came into being. So this is the history behind the name of Jacobean period. Another important or significant question that must have been disturbing you is why, we heard that Queen Elizabeth was a virgin queen. She never married, she died as a virgin queen, she didn't have any children. So then from where does this James I come from? This James I, in order to understand to this, in order to answer to this question, we have to go back to history and remember King Henry VII, who was ruling in the period of 15th century, like this. This man, this king had two children. Number one, King Henry VIII, who was the father of Elizabeth I. This period is clear. The King Henry VII, had also a daughter named Margaret Tudor. This Margaret Tudor had two children, James V, James V and Mary the One. This Mary the One was a rival to Elizabeth I, and she was executed. That's another story. Let us not concentrate on that rivalry now. So this James VI was the father of King James VI. This James VI of Scotland is actually the James I of England. So when Elizabeth I died without any children, the entire British nation was asking who will be the next successor of the throne. The answer was, of course, King James VI. There is no option, rather. So this is how King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England, and became the King of England. And his period is called Jacobean period. This King James I was a Protestant king. I am reminded of a story in this regard, which is not very important from your literary point of view, but you might like to hear to this. You might like to listen to this story. This is the story of bonfire treason. Bonfire treason. On November 5th, if you even now go to England, go to Britain, you will see that this day is celebrated with pomp and grandeur. The people of England, they make life-size models of life-size paper dolls and they burn them. This custom is somewhat, related, or not related, somewhat similar to the custom that we follow, we the Indians follow in our nation, the Sera. Although the context is not similar, but the idea is quite similar. They also make life-size model of life-size models and burn them. So what actually happened on November 5th, 1605? Remember I said King James I was a Protestant king? So the Catholics of England didn't want this King James I to be the King of England. They were always against James I. So they decided to blow the parliament and kill King James I on November 5th. Why November 5th? Why did they choose this particular day? Because this was the beginning day of the opening day of the parliament. So they chose this particular day. The Catholics, they filled the entire basement of the Westminster Abbey with gunpowder. What is gunpowder? Gunpowder is basically the English term for barut. What we call barut is actually gunpowder. They filled the entire basement with gunpowder, but somebody from their group, from the Catholics group, did a treachery to the king. And sent an anonymous letter to the king, telling him about all these things that are going to be happened. The king came to know. The king's men then arrived and went there and got the leader of that particular group of Catholics, called Guy Fawkes, red-handed. He was caught red-handed with matches and all, and he was executed. So from that day, that particular day, even now, this November 5th is celebrated as a symbol of security and safety for the entire British nation. It started from that day only. So this was the story behind bonfire treason or Jesuit treason. This is also called gunpowder plot. The same story with different names. And King James I thus established Stuart dynasty in England. Now that you know much about the political background, social and the cultural paradigm of this period, let us now finally go deeper into the literary works that were published in this period, the writers who were prominent in this particular era. So our King James I was also a very learned man. He was a Protestant and he had a quite belief in the witchcraft, for which he wrote Demonology in 1597, and which is considered to be the one of the most prominent sources of Shakespeare's Macbeth. King James I, you must have heard that King James I ordered to publish the authorized version of Bible, which we called King James I's Bible, King James's Bible. It was published in 1611 with the help of 47 scholars all over the nation. They published this Bible, and apart from him, there were also other writers, other genres which were very, very prominent in this period. For example, Jacobean drama, essay, Jacobean poetry, not poetry, but metaphysical poets who were coming at the later part of this period. And also, so let us now talk about Jacobean drama first. Let us come one by one. When we talk about Jacobean drama, please remember it was not as popular or as good in its artistic sense as of the as of the dramas which came in earlier earlier days, like in Elizabethan age. It was not as sophisticated as those dramas, unlike the sophistication and royal elements of Elizabethan drama. Jacobean drama was mainly uh, concentrated on adultery, some disturbing features like adultery, uh, you know, corruption, lust, greed. These were the common elements of Jacobean drama, and the reason behind this, you must be able to, uh, you know, uh, connect, because we have already heard about we have already learned the cultural paradigm of this period. It was a disturbing period when people are having faith. People are losing faith. In fact, people are losing faith in religion, in spirituality. They are being there's a spiritual discord in this time, lack of faith, lack of belief, and all this actually led to the disturbing genres of Jacobean period. So everything was, if you talk about the Jacobean genre, you'll see that revenge tragedy was there, city comedy. I mean, in drama, tragedy was there, city comedy was there, and also tragic comedy was there, mask was there. These were the prominent genres of Jacobean period. In each of these genres are very, you know, disturbing genres, as we call them. When you talk about revenge tragedy, we must have heard about Shakespeare's Hamlet, Middleton's revenge tragedy that came in the year 1606, and also Woman Be Our Woman. Another important work of is Webster's White Devil, The Duchess of Malfi. These are all, and John Ford's This Pity She is a Whore, which came in 1633. These are all examples of revenge tragedy. And remember, Shakespeare's most important four tragedies, which we call HOKM: Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, King Lear, and Macbeth. All of them came in this particular time from 1601 onwards. So, as you can understand that this genres of Jacobean drama was in itself very much disturbing, and the city comedy was also prominent in this time, which talked about the underworld criminals of London city. And after Jacobean drama, another important literary genre that was prominent in this period is essay, about which I have already talked about just a few minutes earlier. The word essay comes from the Latin word assai. Assai means what? Assai means a short attempt. A short attempt to do what? A short attempt to talk about the personal experience of a person in a non-frictional prose style. Means what? A person will be talking about his or her subjective experience or subjective understanding in a non-fictional prose style, which will affect the readers or the audiences. The father of English essays is Francis Bacon, about whom we have already discussed. The father of English essays, please remember, not the father of essays. The father of essays is French writer Montaigne, and the father of English essays is our Francis Bacon. We have already discussed about Bacon. We said that Bacon consumed knowledge. Now you can relate why essay was so popular a genre in this period, because people were trying to know everything in this world. People were trying to understand the entire world from their own point of view, from their own perspective. They were not ready to blindly believe on any particular religion or any or you know, take into consideration any dogmatic view of the church. They try to question and understand things from their using their own logic. If we talk about Bacon's most famous works, then the first uh, work that comes to our mind is definitely The Advancement of Learning, which was published in 1605. I made a mistake few minutes earlier. It is not 16, not 20 when Advancement was Learning was published. It was actually Novum Organum, which was another work of Bacon himself, which was published in 1620, and this Advancement of Learning was published in 1605. Please remember. And this was a collection of 58 essays, and it was very much praised by King James I. In fact, it was in the time of King James I when Bacon's writing came into prominence. So the other writers, apart from essays of this period, other prose writers of this period was Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson's important works like Epicene the Silent Woman, The Alchemist, Bartholomew Fair, all this came in this Jacobean period. And his famous theory of four humors, this also came in this time. And Ben Jonson is also called to be the first 1660 poet laureate of England. Another writer who was prominent was Robert Burton, whose the melancholy which was the name Anatomy of Melancholy, which was published in 1621, was also popular, a prose fiction in this period. So this was all about fiction and non-fiction and drama. I'm not dealing with specific texts in this particular video. For that I'll make other videos, because in this video, in this discussion, I'm mainly giving an overview of the writings of the background of this period. Okay, not going to deal any particular text. We'll definitely talk about Bacon's essays in other videos, and of course metaphysical poets, which is my favorite, in other videos. Okay, now that we have talked about Jacobean drama, Jacobean prose, Jacobean fiction and non-fiction, another important genre that was very prominent is the poetry section. And which poetry? Metaphysical poetry, which came in the later part of this period with the works of John Donne, Harvard, Grasham. Now it is time to talk about metaphysical poetry. From 1620 onwards, what was the time period? What was the time all about? It was all about enlightenment. Is it true that enlightenment only affected scientific discoveries, as we have already discussed about enlightenment, and we have learned what enlightenment was all about? Enlightenment was all about logic, about reasoning, about sense of rationality and all. So innumerable scientific discoveries and colonial explorations were happening in this time. We have talked about Copernicus, we have talked about Galileo, Newton, who were the prominent scientists of this period. So can it ever happen that these scientific discoveries, which were happening all over the world, didn't affect writing, didn't affect poetry? It is impossible. It did affect poetry. It definitely affected poetry. In the poetry of John Donne's Good Morrow, we see that Donne is referring to the sea discoverers. He is referring to mapmakers. He is referring to hemispheres, which were beyond any kind of imaginations for the poets of earlier age. Like in Old English poetry, you can never find any such example of scientific, any such mention of sea discoverer or hemisphere. They were writing only about stars and moon and all. Never wrote about hemisphere. So with the hands of John Donne, with the hands of metaphysical poets, something different is coming. Something different genre, a different, completely different genre is being prominent. And you'll be shocked to know that the poets we now call metaphysicals were not called metaphysicals in their own time. Then what were they called? They were called nothing. Actually, nobody actually gave that much of importance to the poetry of John Donne in that period, which the recognition which the metaphysical poets have gained now was not there when they were actually writing this poetry. In the with the help of with in the work of Dr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson was the first person who mentioned the term metaphysical poetry in his work, The Life of Abraham Cowley, for the first time. For the first time of English literature, when the metaphysical started gaining their recognition, and it was most prominent in the modernist period with the writing of T.S. Eliot, who for the first time wrote an extensive essay on the metaphysical called on the metaphysical poets, on the metaphysical poetry, where he is talking about dissociation of sensibility. So T.S. Eliot was the first person who actually was able to comprehend, to give recognition to this outstanding segment of poets, beginning with John Donne to Herbert Grashow and others. When we talk about metaphysical poetry, one particular phrase is there that you must have heard in your books is carpe diem, seize the day. And another metaphysical poetry is also characterized with paradoxes, conceits, puns. And what is conceit? Conceit, we have heard that two dissimilar ideas are yoked with violence together. Like there is a concept of discordia concord in the metaphysical poetry. What is discordia concord? Discordia concord is a combination of dissimilar images. In the poetry of John Donne, you see, in the poetry of John Donne's Good Morrow in particular, you see the mention of hemisphere, which was beyond imagination for the writers of any other era before the 17th century. To talk about, while talking about his beloved, he is talking about hemisphere and sea discoverers. It was beyond imagination. So this Discordia Concord, this different kind of writing, the influence of the age of the Enlightenment period is very vivid in John Donne's poetry and in other metaphysicals also. You will see the most prominent feature of metaphysical poetry, apart from conceits and Discordia Concords and all, Carpe Diem, most important feature was love. It was all about love, pure love. As I have already mentioned, that from Renaissance onwards, the style of writing poetry, the theme of poetry is being changed. মানে কবিতা লেখার ধরন যেমন পাল্টাচ্ছে, কবিতার বিষয়বস্তুও পাল্টাচ্ছে. In Old English period or Middle English period, you'll get no such example of the love between a man and a woman. But with the advancement of Renaissance and Renaissance humanism, you find love to be the prominent feature of poetry. From Petrarchan poetry to Shakespeare to metaphysical poetry, the treatment of love is also being changed. মানে love concept is there, but the treatment of it is being changed. How? So the treatment of love itself is also being changed. In the Petrarchan sonnets or in the poems of Sidney Spencer, you'll find the adoration for the beloved, the platonic love, the concept of platonic love, admiration. And after that, who is coming? Our Shakespeare. In Shakespeare's sonnet, what do you see? In the Dark Lady section, you will see that there is a kind of realism in the treatment of love. And in the works of metaphysical poets, there is a rational treatment of love. And most important, a mutual type of love. I'm giving example of 3 such poems, and with this example I'll be concluding this video. First of all, Sidney's Astrophel and Stella. I'm reading the first 2 lines, just listen. Loving in truth and fain in verse, my love to show, that she, dear she, might take some pleasure in pain. This is Sidney. After that, Shakespeare's sonnet number 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Now done. In his poem Good Morn, he is writing, I wonder by my truth what thou and I did till we loved. Is it clear? In the first poem, in Astrophel and Stella, you see that the lover is trying to show something, is trying to show his love to his beloved. It is one way. In the second sonnet, in sonnet number 18, you find a kind of treatment of realism in this line. And finally, with the help of metaphysicals, this idea completely changed. And in Donne's this poem Good Morrow, you find this phrase like what thou and I, and finally we did tomorrow. This mutual treatment of love, this kind of mutual treatment of love is there in this poem, in the poem of Metaphysicals. There are a lot of other things that can be talked about metaphysical poets and metaphysical poetry, but maybe in some other video. For now, thank you.